It was always my dream to make movies. And it was always my dream to be a Hollywood director.
I pursued being a film major in my undergraduate in Ohio, which is my home state, and got a 4-year degree, BFA in motion picture production, which of course guarantees you a job in the industry immediately when you show up with that.
Where I grew up was about as far from the film industry as could be. Well, not as could be. I'm sure I could have grown up in Siberia too, but I grew up in a small village in South Wales, and really had zero idea of how you might penetrate the film industry or television.
I was living in Austin. I was delivering pizza. I was going to move to Chicago and do Second City, and then go to New York because I grew up thinking like LA, like Hollywood, like sell out. What am I going to sell out?
Maybe she was thinking, do I really want to put my career on the line with this guy? Like, I was a nobody. I was in film school. I was like 23 and green as they came.
And I realized that I wasn't 18 years old in the mailroom at William Morris, and I wasn't, infinitely wealthy, and I didn't have relatives in the film business. Those are like the 3 main ways to get into the business normally.
What am I doing? I'm sitting here, I'm staring at a phone that doesn't ring. Phone's not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. I could be sitting here a year from now, and me and my phone can be hanging out together, or I can be sitting here a year from now, and me and my phone could be hanging out with a script that I wrote.
Would I do this for the rest of my life if I got nothing in return? And I thought, yeah, I would.
I was crushed. I mean, it was the hardest. I couldn't believe that this is what had happened again in this year. And I literally went on my face on the rug, and I just wept and wept and wept.
And I missed a lot of auditions because I couldn't make it, but and that sucked. That was a hard time because I hated missing them. I'd rather get rejected than to miss it.
If there is a moment in life where you feel some kind of unbelievable good fortune, or a dream come true, I guess would be the word.
It was always my dream to make movies. And it was always my dream to be a Hollywood director. But that was kind of like a secret, because I'm from Sweden, and it's like the other side of the world. Like, I don't have any like family members who are in showbiz or anything like that. So it's not like you can say to friends and family, like, yeah, I'm going to be a Hollywood director, because people are going to be like, yeah, sure. Like, I'm going to be the king of Spain or whatever, But that was always the goal. And then it's been, a lot of times that goal has felt really far away, and I've been very depressed and felt like, oh, this is never going to happen, of course. But that was always the goal. Like, that was what I wanted to do with my life. So in a way, it's been, you can't say that it's been expected, but it's always been the goal. So it's always been like, yeah, that's what I really want. So it's more of like, the feeling is not a surprise. Well, it is a feeling of surprise that, wow, it actually happened. What I want, my dream actually came true, but the dream has always been there, if that makes sense. I think video store was my first job, which was sort of under the table, not really official, but it was kind of cool. I loved it because, yeah, I had access to movies. I could rent all these free movies, and sometimes you get screeners, so you could see movies before they came out on video and things like that. But I've never been much of a people person. So, I mean, it's you have to talk to people a lot, that was the downside of it, but all the movies, that was the great part. And then I worked a little bit in like grocery stores and things like that, and I hated that even more, because that's the downsides of working in a video store, but without the movies. And then I was unemployed for quite a while. I was really depressed. I was still living with my mom in my 20s, and eventually, I started making animation because I've always wanted to make movies. I was making movies with friends. But then as we started getting older, your friends are getting jobs and lives, and suddenly it's like, there's not as much time and willingness to make little dumb shorts. So that's when I started doing animation, because it was something I could do all by myself. I didn't have to rely on other people's schedules or money or whatever. It was just like, I've always liked drawing. So I could do that on my computer all by myself. I'll just record the voices and didn't even need an expensive camera for it. And I was lucky in that this was in 2005, 2006, when YouTube was a new thing. So, I signed up to that, didn't really know what it was, but it's like, okay, I can upload videos here. And I uploaded a little animated short I made and got a really good response. Like, people really seemed to like it. So I was like, well, this is great. So I made another one that was a little bit more ambitious than the first one. The first one was almost like a slideshow. I mean, I hesitate to call it animation because it's an actual slideshow. But then the second one I got more ambitious with. And I made this story that was very personal about sort of the thoughts in your head that put you down and like tell you that you're shit, and basically an angel and the devil on your shoulder. And that one really took off online, got all these views, and really went viral. But it was in Swedish, so it didn't go outside of Scandinavia, but like Norway, Denmark, and people in Finland. And that got me a lot of attention. I got like to go on TV and like, what's it like to have a viral hit? And it also led to me getting some jobs, like companies who are like, we want to make a little funny video about our product or whatever. And we loved your funny video. Can you do something for us? And I would do that. And often it's kind of funny because the shorts I made were very crude. Like they had a lot of bad language and like big penises and things like that. And of course, when companies want to do something, it's like, yeah, we want that, but not that. So you kind of have to do something that's not as fun. But now I was actually getting some money, getting paid, which was great. And so I could move out and didn't have to live with my mom anymore. And this also led to me meeting my wife. I mean, we actually dated when we were 11.
Oh, wow.
She was into acting. I was already into making movies. And then when this short went viral, she saw it. And, we dated when we were 11, then had a 14-year break. And she saw this movie and was like, recognized my voice and contacted me to reconnect. And we did and got back together. And now, when we now were dating, she was an actress. I had a video camera. It's like, oh, we can make things together. And we tried getting money from the Swedish Film Institute, because in Sweden, you apply for grants from the Film Institute for your shorts or even for your features. That's basically how all movies are made there. But we didn't have any luck because they weren't as interested in sort of the genre stuff that we wanted to do. And I think I've always had sort of a commercial bent for movies. Like that's kind of my taste. American fun popcorn movies and things like that. And in Sweden, especially when you have that grant-based system and it's taxpayer money and they have to be real responsible what they do with that money, it often goes to films that are more sort of important and take up sort of issues with society and things like that. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's led to some great movies, but yeah, it didn't really work out for us. So we were turned down, but then we felt like, well, screw it. I mean, you're an actress. I have a camera. Let's just do something. We don't need money. We can do little shorts ourselves. So we did a little short called Come Closer. That was a horror short about like a phone that sees the future. I put that up on my YouTube channel that now had a few thousand followers from my animated work. And they were kind of surprised, a lot of the followers, because they expected sort of humorous animated things, and suddenly it's this terrifying little horror short. But people still seem to like it, even though they were surprised. And we really enjoyed doing it. And then we saw this, there was an online contest by these horror collective in the UK called Bloody Cuts. Like, make an under 3-minute horror film and you can win prizes and things. So we were like, well, that's what we're doing now. We just did Come Closer. Let's do something for this. And that's when we did Lights Out. Again, just me and Lotta in our apartment trying to like figure out, okay, what can we do that's scary? And we were like, I think everyone's had that feeling of in our house, it was a coat rack that you walk out in the middle of the night. It's like, ooh, it looks like someone's standing there. And you turn on lights. Oh, there's nothing there. And that's sort of how it, playing around with the light gave us this idea of, okay, there's something that actually is there every time you turn off the lights. So we did that, uploaded it to the contest. And then we found out that we didn't win the contest. But then a little while later, they also had secondary prizes. So I won Best Director, which was like, oh, that's awesome. But we didn't think that anything else would happen with that. We were like, oh, fun, let's make more movies. But then a few months after that, this was in March 2014, I saw on Reddit that someone had linked to our short. And it's like, oh, that's awesome. I showed Lotta, and then I go in to see the stats, and it was like 17,000 views. And it's like, oh, that's so much. That's awesome. And then just minutes later, it was like 70,000 views. And then it was like over 140,000 views. And it just kept going and going. It's like, what's happening? But I think, it was just 2.5 minutes short, and there's no dialogue in it. I think that really helped it to spread. Partly because people don't have an attention span anymore. So it's like, if they see it, oh, it's only 2.5 minutes, I can watch that. And because there's no dialogue, it could spread everywhere. So we really sort of lucked into something that was really universal. It was just a few days after that, I actually said to Lotta that, I've heard of people getting representation in Hollywood from shorts, like from managers and agents and things like that. And like the day after I said that, I woke up to an email from a management firm here in Hollywood. I showed Lotta, it's like, I told you, it's like, it's starting. And then it was just like, open the floodgates, because we got emails from agents and managers and producers and studios and like sometimes actors and people as well, or makeup artists and all these things. It's like, what is this? And these managers and agents that want to represent us. And I had to get like an IMDb Pro account just to find out who these people are. And eventually I picked a manager who could then help us navigate this whole thing with getting an agent and who can we trust with producers and all of that. And this producer, Lawrence Gray, seemed really good, and he was really into it, because a lot of them were just wanted to know who we were and what our plans were, or, and you don't know, like they didn't explicitly say, we want to make this movie or we want to represent you. So, and I kind of need that. I don't know if it's because I'm Swedish and kind of introverted. Like I'm not good with sort of interpreting subtle signs. Like, so I went with like the producer was like, yes, I want to make this movie. We should make this movie. Boom. It's like, oh, all right, let's go. We went with Lawrence Gray, who, and it was kind of a weird situation because once this happened, it was about a year before the movie happened, which is actually pretty quick, but it feels strange in that situation to sort of wait for all of these things and not knowing if it's real, if it's actually going to happen or not. Because during this year, it was, signing with a management firm and an agency and all of that, and then finding a writer, working with the writer to develop a script and making a deal for all of this with, getting a lawyer and all of that. So during this year, Lotta and I, we didn't know if this was actually real or if it was all bullshit. So we were like, well, we can't stop going. So we kept making shorts, around our house where we could come up with little new ideas. We made one in the attic, one in the basement, and just trying to come up with new stuff. And, for each of these shorts, I would make these little behind the scenes videos. That turned out to be very appreciated by people who saw this, like other up and coming filmmakers. And it was something I did just because I loved, that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see, I've always loved seeing behind the scenes and making ofs and all these because, just to learn as much as possible and see what it's like on a film set and how do you create these things and all that. So we just kept doing that. And we even had this idea that we would make a feature, just her and I, if this didn't pan out. But then in March, something like that, of 2015, they basically saw, yeah, movie is happening. we need you here like next week or whatever. So Lotta basically had to quit her job because she was working in a group home. You know, I was a freelance animator, so I didn't have anything steady going. So we basically, you know, locked our apartment, got on a plane, and this was paid for by the studio because we were broke. Like when we first got a manager, you know, they were like, hey, can you get out here? Because we want you to meet all these people and go like on this, you know, tour of Hollywood. It's like, oh, hey, this is this guy and whatever. But we didn't have any money. So it's like, yeah, we can't do that. But then they paid for us to fly out here. And yeah, it was very strange. We had to find a place to live here, and everything is super expensive in LA. But we found on an Airbnb this half a garage in Burbank. It was sort of parted into two. So this mother and her daughter were our neighbors in this garage. And it was like, I mean, for us, it was like $2,500 or something a month. And for us, that is insane. Yeah, and I mean, it was a pretty nice garage. I mean, it wasn't bad or anything, but it was quite a shock to find out how expensive it was. And we still didn't have any money. And when we got over here, yeah, the studio paid for the flight over and everything. And they were gonna pay for living expenses, but not until the movie was greenlit. And it wasn't actually greenlit until quite late. So we had to, I mean, first of all, we borrowed from everyone we knew back home in Sweden. And then when that money ran out, it's like, what do we do now? So we had to borrow from the producer and the manager. And it was kind of dicey because it was like, well, if this doesn't happen, we're in deep shit because we're like all borrowed out when it comes to money. But then thankfully it did happen, the movie. But yeah, it was all pretty crazy because I'd never been on a movie set before. So the first time I actually stepped foot on a real movie set, it was as the director, which was pretty crazy. I mean, especially because, I mean, everyone there had more experience than me, and every assistant and your PA, and like they've all worked on real movies, and I, you know, and part of me think, you know, I think they kind of thought I was more experienced than I was, and you know, I wasn't going to correct them. It was just like, yeah, sure, if you want me to make your movie, I will. But you know, they would ask me if, oh, do you have a DP you usually work with, or an editor, or a storyboard artist? And it was just, no, I've done all these things myself because I've had to, you know. Actually, the year before it went viral was the first time we were in LA because I made a little animated documentary that it got into a film festival in San Jose. And so we got a little bit of money from the Swedish Film Institute to actually go to that film festival. And then it was like, well, let's go to LA as well. And the producer who we worked with to make that little animated documentary, he was like, well, let's go pitch the studios in Hollywood. And I was like, what are you insane? Like, what do you mean pitch the studios in Hollywood? Like, how are we gonna get in? What are we gonna do? But he was like, no, my brother actually works at Fox in Sweden. So he can probably get us into Fox in LA. I was like, okay. And it was like, all right, let's pitch like a horror movie or something. So I actually wrote a little horror movie, and which was my first like script in English and everything. And we actually got to go there and pitch this thing. We had to sign all these disclaimers because we weren't represented or anything. And, you know, it was an interesting experience, but it was clearly just like, oh, he's a friend of him. Just, you know, just listen to it. You know, I mean, nothing came of it or anything, but it was still a cool experience. Like, yeah, I got to walk on the Fox lot, you know, and actually sit there and talk movies. So yeah, we'd been here before, but and even got into a studio, but but that was it. It was in 2014, March. I mean, at the time it was like 4 million. I remember that. I mean, it landed on like 10 million or something, I think, or 11 million. But I mean, then it's kept going because other people have uploaded it as well, and we didn't like be like, oh, they have to take that down. That's our movie or whatever. I mean, as long as they didn't change anything, it was just like, yeah, upload it. We just want people to see it, you know. So I saw an upload on Facebook. I don't trust Facebook's number though, because it was like, what was that? Like 70, 80, 90 million or something. And it was like, I don't know what Facebook does, but yeah, sure. But a lot of people seem to have seen it, yes.
And the link that was put on Reddit, was that Vimeo or YouTube?
That was Vimeo, actually. So it went viral on Vimeo first, which seems, kind of unique in a way, because it seems like it's mostly YouTube. But then since it was on YouTube as well, that exploded too. But it started on Vimeo.
I just got out of high school trying to figure out what I want to do. And, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to act in some capacity. So I started really just Googling acting schools, acting stuff, anything that encompassed acting, trying to find a sort of channel in. And so I just Googled everything, and pages and pages of things popped up, and I just filled everything out. And then eventually, people started answering. And a lot of those were scams and things that I would ultimately end up wasting my time on. And so I ended up going back and forth from LA to Victorville, scrambling up change. And one time it was a school for modeling and career center, modeling career center. And so they had us get up on the runway, taught us to walk the runway, and taught us all the names of the brands, like Fendi, Gucci, Prada, all these different things that would be of no use to me really. But at the time, I realized every other week they had agents come in for the people that wanted to aspire to get into acting. So I wanted to get in front of one of these agents. And when one of those agents came through, I said, I want to go in. This is audition day. It was like every Thursday or something like that. And they said, well, do you have anything prepared? I said, yes. I didn't, but I went in anyway. And I just did the first thing that came to my mind, which was basically just to jump up on the chair and be like, totally did it in a minute, and do some random stuff. And the guy saw something in me that he liked. What, I don't know. And he signed me to his commercial agency. From there, I began to do auditions and fail and learn what it meant to be rejected, but be in the room and sort of build my comfortability over time. So it would prove to be a very important chapter, although at the time I just thought it was like I was wasting my time, but it proved to be very important once I got out there and really started auditioning. I felt comfortable because I had been rejected and I'd been through all of it already, so there's nothing left to fear. So yeah, that was what came of the internet.
And I understand you didn't have a car while you were in Victorville?
No.
And from what I know, I don't think the bus really runs. Does it run to
No,
LA?
there's a train that goes. You gotta scramble up some change and take the train.
Okay, but that's it sounds like it's several stops. So how are you going on auditions or even to this modeling class school and then coming back? I mean, that sounds like a lot.
Half of it was just trying to hustle up money to get down and get up on the train. And some of it was my parents. They would help me every now and again, take me whenever, whenever my bugging them sort of hit its brain, like, fine, fuck it, we'll go again, for what? Because when you're auditioning and you begin, you don't realize how much rejection's involved in it. So you get rejected 20, 30 times, you're like, what am I still doing this for? Obviously it's not gonna work. And it was so much work for us to get down there that they were just like, this is becoming more of an expense than anything. And so I had to figure out ways to get down there on my own after a while, And I missed a lot of auditions because I couldn't make it, but and that sucked. That was a hard time because I hated missing them. I'd rather get rejected than to miss it, Now there was probably 900 pages when I Googled. It's probably 9 million now. So there's much more to weed from, much more opportunity to get caught up in different things. I would say stay in school, stay diligent, go through high school, go through college, and try to look through opportunities after having sort of learned all you can learn, and situate yourself and be comfortable before you get into acting. Know that there's something else that you could be doing. Know that you have a backup plan, because it's a very difficult, tough game to get into. And it's tough to maintain even once you're in. So it's not like just because you book something means you're gonna be working forever. So you have to always keep that hustle up and continue to look for new avenues, and know that if this doesn't work, I got something else in the back. If that don't work, I got something else. Have other alternatives as well. And don't focus all your energy on acting would be my thing. Everybody's got their particular route, but the thing I think is important to be an actor is always keep an open mind, always be willing to learn. And don't reach a point where you feel like I've learned enough and now I don't need to know anything else, because your talent will take you so far, but you need to be constantly trying to develop skills and learning how to access these characters and analyze these stories and tell them in the most authentic light. And while your talent will take you a long way, it won't take you to the heights that you want to go, because there's a cap, a moment where you're like, well, this is just my talent. So you need to constantly stretch yourself, travel, meet new people, engage in new experiences fearlessly, and sort of download that information into sort of creating what you want to create. Every role is different. So what may work for one role may not work for another, and vice versa. Sometimes your talent will be great for a certain role, and then for another role you have to reach outside the sort of boundaries of your natural talent in order to tap into it. Those are the things that I find the most rewarding and the most difficult. And they cause me to have to get studious and learn all these things, you know, and get into these different lifestyles and understanding. So always keep an open mind, and I think you can explore and do whatever you need to do. And realize, remember, this game is not a competition. It seems like a competition, but it's not. The only person you're in competition with is yourself. And if you think you can't do a certain thing, you can't. If you think you can, you can. You just gotta push yourself. Characters are realizations from people's imaginations. So naturally, some are gonna fit with your imagination and some aren't. And some are based off of real people and are accurate depictions, and some aren't. So you have to use discernment and figure out what speaks to you, what's real to you, and everything's not gonna be. I think when you first start acting, you're gonna take anything that comes at you because you're trying to work it. That's understandable. That's what I did. That's what I think most actors did when they first started out, because you need to work. It is a job. But at the same time, once you start to develop your craft, and you can sort of weed out what speaks to you and what's important, because it's also important to do things that correlate with your frequency, that go with how you're attempting to move. Because if it doesn't, you're portraying something that isn't genuine. And then your performance is good. People are gonna see it and be like, there's something that isn't genuine about that. So just make sure it connects to you. This is why it's important, I think, to expand your horizons and awareness, so that way more things have the ability to sort of click with you. Because the more broad your horizon is, the more chance you'll be like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Rather than living in a sort of vacuum, and then something coming into your awareness, you're like, that's too foreign, I don't know what that is, you know. And never judge the characters.
And that was like 20 years ago is when I made this movie, Kissing Jessica Stein, and I think it was just, there are all kinds of watershed moments that you have when you look back at a career, and sometimes you obviously, it's easier to look back at them as opposed to when they're happening. That year was monumental simply because I was doing camera assisting, and I was sort of going back and forth between shooting and assisting, and I made a real effort that year to stop doing any assisting and really cut that tie off and just hang in the wind with whatever I could get my hands on. And it was tough going, because it's early in your career, and you interview for a lot of stuff, but you don't necessarily get it. And Kissing Jessica Stein was near the end of the year, and I remember just thinking, wow, that was a tough year. It was like a year of struggle, and yet that movie then served to be, at the time, was like the first movie of mine that sort of went to festivals and made some money and gave me a profile that allowed me to get Garden State, and Garden State then allowed me to get, you know, Dukes of Hazzard, which allowed me to get studio movies like Dan in Real Life, or you know, or Hangover, and those kind of things. So each of those things ends up serving as like a stepping stone to the next thing. So, you know, I've had successes with movies where, like, the Hangover franchise obviously gave a profile to me and Todd, and allowed us to make more movies and gave me some other opportunities. But I think between Godzilla this year and Joker, both being released in the same year and being not necessarily comedies or in that genre, it's felt like a really positive year, because I've just been able to sort of show a little different gear of myself photographically, and just show muscles that I think other people hadn't necessarily had an opportunity to see, things that I've always wanted to experience, which hopefully will lead to future projects that will continue to show that side of myself and allow me to do stuff that's challenging, but also a little bit artistic as well. Every movie I ever do, I literally try to say, this has to be the best thing I've ever done, every movie. And so I always set out for that to be the goal, and certainly it was one of the last movies I've done, so I feel like it to some extent I accomplished that for myself. What's the biggest lesson I took from Joker, or making Joker, that I would pass on to filmmakers? I think that there's two things. I think one, to really push yourself and take chances, and to just not take the conservative route. So I think one, I kept the movie very simple in a lot of ways, but every day and every time we set to do a scene, I just made a conscious effort to like not hold back and to, you know, it's easy. You take some risks when you're young, and then you get opportunities in which the movies get bigger, and sometimes you're under time constraints in which you have to go back to like a thing you've done before in a way that can be somewhat repetitive but also conservative. And I think if you can find opportunities to just be as risky as you can be and to take chances, I think the payoff will be great. And I think that's something I'd take away for sure. And also, when you think about what, yeah, it also will, the movie also was an experience for me where I'd have a lot of conversations between me, Todd, and Joaquin about which direction we should go. Sometimes it was like photographically, sometimes it was with the character, sometimes it was with the story. And because I've worked with Todd 6 times, I was involved in some of those more intimately than perhaps some cinematographers would be. And I think what I came across was sometimes I was right in my opinion, and sometimes I was wrong. Same thing with Todd and Joaquin, they were sometimes right. And so I think between the three of us, I recognized that all those conversations, and sometimes they were arguments and sometimes they were heated, I recognized that like, you're gonna be right sometimes and you're not gonna be right sometimes. And so it's really important to have a point of view and fight for that point of view, but also recognize that you may not be right. And that that's always and so just don't be so arrogant or self, just like don't feel that if you're shot down in your opinion or whatever direction you think, that suddenly it's not the right thing for the movie, because it may well be, and you just can't see it yet. So I think it was like just a little bit of an experience to recognize that, you know, that there are a lot of different choices you can make in a movie, and the collaboration, I think, is the most important thing, and that each opinion has its own, has really valid sort of pros and cons, you know.
I had an idea for a movie, and I pitched it to my agent, and she goes, "Oh, I think this is great. Let's take it out to the marketplace." And then she said, "Let's make a list of our dream places that we want to sell it." So she goes, "If you could sell it to anyone, who would it be?" And it was so heady. I thought like, "Oh yeah, who would I sell it to?" And I said, "Ridley Scott." She kind of laughed like, "Okay, yeah, we'll take it there, and then when they pass, we'll go down the list, then we'll go to places that actually could." So I go into Ridley Scott and I pitch with Sue Williams, who is a development executive, smart, nicest woman. And you know, this is really important when you're pitching, is you're trying to get as much information. So I was pitching her this project, and at some point I saw her body language shift, and I go, "Oh, is something off about that?" And she goes, "Ridley doesn't like these kind of things. I think this is really exciting for him, but not if it's going down that road." I'm like, "What kind of things does Ridley like?" And so she started sharing things. It was so helpful. So we could kind of retool the pitch together. And so she was instrumental. So when you go somewhere and you're pitching, you know, you're trying to get as much information from that person. And it's a real, sometimes writers have ego and they're like, "Yeah, I'm going in this place and I'm pitching to the lowest person on the totem pole." Oh, that's great, because you get information about the decision maker. Okay, so Sue Williams helped me reformulate the pitch in a way that would be a better fit for Ridley. So that was amazing, and I will forever be grateful for her. Then I got brought in to pitch to Mimi, who was at the time Ridley's producing partner. And this is a long pitch. This is almost an hour pitch. It's like a 50-minute pitch. This is not a short pitch. I always hate when people say, "Your pitches have to be this amount of time." There's no rules. Like, first of all, when someone says you have to do your pitch in 10 minutes, people think that people will listen to you for 10 minutes. They'll listen to you as long as they're interested. And if they're not interested after 30 seconds, they tune you out. And most pitches that sell are longer pitches because people want to have the confidence that this has been worked out and what they're buying is legit. Anyway, so it's a long pitch. So I'm pitching to Mimi, and it can't be going worse. She's sitting back like this. She's not making eye contact. She looks in pain. She looks like this pitch is so bad that it is making her go crazy. And the only reason I have a career is at the time, I wanted to be doing stand-up or improv, so I was pursuing that. And in improv, I was learning that one of my problems, my weaknesses, is when I thought things were going well, I was alive and animated. But when I thought things weren't going well, I didn't think the audience was into it. My fear of rejection runs through this. I would sort of back off and sort of tune out of the scene. I'd kind of let you guys take it. I would just sort of drop out of the scene, which is, you don't do that as an improviser. So what I was being taught is when you think things are going terrible, walk to the center of the stage, take focus and just say something and just stay in there, stay alive. Don't worry about people's judgments. Follow your process. So I'm pitching, and after about 7 minutes, I'm like, she hates me, she hates this pitch, she's never gonna buy it, she's in pain. And that voice says, just do the short version and get out of here. This is painful for her, it's painful for you. Ridley was never gonna buy this pitch. Just get out of here, just wrap it up and go. Which I would do as a stand-up, terrible habit. But another voice said, okay, look, you're never gonna be a writer as evidenced by the pain you're causing this woman. Maybe you could be a performer. So use this as a way of practicing your improv skills. Stay engaged, stay engaged. That voice went through my head. So I stay engaged, and I just did the pitch with gusto and focus and tried not to look too much at Mimi and see how much pain she was in, and I finished. And then there was just silence. I mean, painful silence. And then she stands up and she goes, I don't get it. And then Sue Williams said, well, what don't you get? She goes, all of it. And then she looked at me and she goes, like something like, maybe we'll be in touch, or just something, and walked out. And Sue didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say. And then I left and I drove home and I called my agent and I'm like, well, you were right. Ridley's not going to buy this. Then Sue calls me and I pick up the phone, and she's like, hey, when you pitched with me, you were really good. But when you pitched for Mimi, and I know where this is going, she said, you were on fire. Mimi loved it. Now, there's a lesson in this, which is don't try to read the room, because I've pitched to people, I've pitched to heads of studios that laughed and loved it, because when someone's hearing a pitch, they're trying to decide, am I going to buy this? Am I going to take this to my boss? That could be stressful. And I pitched to a studio once where he knew right away he wasn't going to buy it because they had a similar idea in development. So he just relaxed and had fun with me. We had a great time, but he already knew he wasn't going to buy it. I found out Mimi only takes 1 or 2 pitches to Ridley a year. And when she was hearing this pitch, she was internally going, oh my God, this is something Ridley would really love. And I can't speak for her, but I'm guessing that maybe she was nervous because maybe she was thinking, do I really want to put my career on the line with this guy? I was a nobody. I was in film school. I was 23 and green as they came. And I think that she probably, hearing the pitch, was having an internal debate. Again, I can't speak for her, but that's my guess. So Sue's like, yeah, I probably should have told you she could be a little that's sort of her way she listens. So don't read people's, I've been in rooms where people seem like they hated it, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Stay committed, have integrity, do the pitch. Okay, so to your question, sorry for the long wind-up. So I was told that Ridley wouldn't be back in town for a month. Mimi did have one big concern that she wanted changed. It was a hard creative thing to figure out, but I'm like, I have a month to figure it out. A few days later, I told you I got a phone call. Here's what I didn't tell you. I don't drink much alcohol. I'm just a lightweight. I'm the cheapest date ever. And the night before, I was at some party and I drank more than I've ever drank in my life. And it doesn't take much to get me drunk. I think that morning might have been my first ever hangover, or it was the worst ever hangover. So when the phone rang, I hadn't showered, I hadn't shaven, I was hungover, it was my agent. And she said, Ridley's in town, and he would like to hear the pitch. He has a slot in an hour, can you hear the pitch? And it takes 45 minutes to get there to Beverly Hills from where I was. And so I said, and this is not a good idea, but I said, oh, that's exciting. Can we bump it up till 2? And there was this long pause. And I know my agent was thinking, why did I sign this guy? And she said, so Corey, Ridley's in town. He has a slot. he'd like to hear your pitch in an hour. And at least then I was like, of course, I will be there in an hour. This kind of works out to my favor. So I quickly shave and shower, and on the drive, drink coffee, on the drive over, I'm just figuring out how to solve that creative problem. What happened is I got there with a second to spare, and they jerked me into the room with them. I never had the chance to get nervous. I never had the chance to psych myself out. I was just on pure adrenaline. And Ridley was the sweetest person ever. He came in the room, you know, and I started to like, you know, it's an honor. And it was like Blade Runner and Alien. Like it was a literal honor to be in a room with him, let alone the fact that he was going to listen to me pitch a project. And he just immediately said, like, you know, we're just two creative people. I want to hear your idea. You don't have to be great at performing. My staff loves it. I just want to hear. Like, he went out of his way to make me feel comfortable and that I belonged there. Because I did not feel like I belonged in a room pitching to Ridley Scott. And I was just on adrenaline with no no time to prep, you know, psych myself out. And so I just started talking. And he was just, he listened and he nodded, and he was so receptive, and he was so loving and gentle. I'll never forget that. And he was just amazing. And then at the end, he asked the question that you always want to hear, which is, he said, so who else has heard this pitch? And I said, nobody, you're the first pitch. You're the first place. He goes, well, who else is going to hear this pitch? And I gave some of the places that we had meetings set up. And he looked at his staff, and then he turned to me and he said, who's your agent? And I told him, Dan Cairns, ICM. And he called my agent and he said, I want to take this off the market. So that was just like, I really thought I was dreaming. And then I remember I was driving home in my like cruddy little car, my little Flintstones car, my wife called it, because you had to use your feet to stop it. Film school, no money car. And I was driving on the 405, and I started shaking. I just was shaking. I had to pull over. And the thought that went through my head wasn't that I just launched my career. It wasn't that I just sold. The thought that went through my head was, I just met Ridley Scott. It was so nerdy. I was just in, and not only that, once the deal was consummated, they said, we want you on the next plane to London so that Ridley and his team will develop the structure with you. And they meant the literal next plane to London. So my wife and I, my girlfriend at the time, now wife, Rebecca, we were like, she's like, I'll help you pack, because I don't know how to pack. And I'm like, great. And she's getting all my clothes. She goes, where's your suitcase? I'm like, what? I don't have a suitcase.
Oh, no.
So we ran to like Target and bought a suitcase and everything. And then they flew me first class. And I didn't know first class existed. I didn't know what first class was. Grew up with no money. So they kept bringing me like food and wine. And I was like, no. I was thinking, I can't afford this. You know, like I don't want to pay for all this when I land. And then at some point in London, someone said, no, in first class, it's all included. So on the way back, I was like, more food, more wine. But yes, Ridley just, I mean, he treated me throughout the entire process. And he called me when they weren't going to make it, and he explained why, which he didn't have to do. Throughout the entire process, he treated me like a writer who belonged to be there. And someone that he wanted to hear my opinions. He didn't want me just to defer to him. I mean, it was amazing. I'll forever be grateful for that. He spoiled me, because at some point I was like, well, that's how everyone. Now that's how I've worked with some of the best people in the business. That's how they treat writers. And I've worked with people who don't treat writers that way, so.
When you pulled over on the 405, do you remember, was there a song playing on the radio, or?
I don't. Okay. I just remember, I remember I was going to crash. That's a good question. I don't remember. I just kept thinking I came home and my girlfriend was like, so? And I'm like, I met Ridley Scott. And she's like, I know you met Ridley Scott, but oh yeah, he bought it. But I was just a little film school nerd who was excited to meet Ridley Scott.
The best piece of advice I got during that time was from my girlfriend at the time. And she said, you should just write a movie and then sell it to a studio. And then you can find out how it all really works. And that's why I wrote my first script. And that was a really great piece of advice. And I guess because of me thinking of it that simply, I was able to sell my first script. Maybe that's why, I don't know. I mean, it's obviously not that easy, but in my head it was. And so I wrote this thing and we got it out and done. That was probably the best piece. Worst piece? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, there were bad things said to me. They weren't necessarily advice. Like nobody ever said, you know, go home, kid, you bother me. But I don't know if I got a piece of bad advice. But I did get that. I did get that advice, and I decided to write. And we sold that script to Columbia.
From the time that she told you that, how much time went by when you started writing that script?
Next day.
Next day, wow. This is before Starbucks or no?
Yeah.
Starbucks was around. Wow. Did the world exist before Starbucks?
There probably was Starbucks, but
Yeah.
I don't drink coffee. So
Oh, you don't? Okay.
Yeah, I
okay.
can't. I'm one of those weirdos that doesn't.
So where did you start writing the script? Because there was
I
no
had a
Starbucks,
friend who was an aspiring writer, and he had final draft. So I went to him and I said, hey man, I want to write a script. And he was like, you want what? I said, just give me the final draft, show me how it works. He's like, that's not how final draft works. I was like, dude, whatever. Just, you know, just show me how it works. So he taught me how it worked. He's like, you just do that and hit the tab and then write the thing. I was like, all right. So what are you going to write? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to write a script. I want to write a script.
Well, you didn't have an idea.
Not
it was
at the
like
time.
Floating around, no?
No, I was like, I'm just going to write one. I've been reading them all my life. Can't be that hard.
Right.
Hard, but I just figured, just write a script, just start. Like, what am I doing? I'm sitting here, I'm staring at a phone that doesn't ring. You know, phone's not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. I could be sitting here a year from now, and me and my phone can be hanging out together, or I could be sitting here a year from now, and me and my phone could be hanging out with a script that I wrote. So I started writing, and I was like, I just want to figure out something that will work. And at the time, it was like, you had all these, it was like the teen stuff was hot. So this is like post-Scream. Right. This is like Cruel Intentions. And, you know, I Know What You Did Last Summer when the lights went off in Georgia or whatever. So I was like, all right, so they're making this stuff. And everything was in high school. So I was like, okay, I'll put something in college. All right, what's a story? They all seem to be horrors and thrillers. Okay. Oh, yeah. So I started looking at films that were really, really popular, like in the 80s. Take that story, that basic idea, set it in college now. Now I got a thing that's just a proven track record that works, but then I got this other thing and it's new and it's fresh and it's different. And that became the first script. That became I Would Die For You. It was about a guy going to Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, and had a girlfriend, and life was good, and a buddy of his in his hometown was getting married. So he goes back to his hometown for the wedding without his girlfriend because she was off doing whatever, and he runs into his ex-girlfriend from high school, and she and he end up, you know, and he leaves. He says, you know, it's a mistake, whatever. It's good to see you. He goes back to his life in UC Santa Barbara, turns around, there's the ex-girlfriend. Hey, how are you? What's up? Is this your girlfriend? Oh my God, she's so great. Now the girlfriend loves the ex-girlfriend and he's in hell. And that became I Would Die For You. And Columbia bought that up. We had a good time with it. It was fun.
How long did it take you to write it?
I hate this question.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. It's good. 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Wow.
Yeah.
How many drafts did you do?
Before I sold it?
Mm-hmm.
3, maybe 4. Well, it wasn't a lot. I didn't do a lot of drafts.
How did you get access to pitch Columbia? Like, who did
yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Then, yes, I was still sort of making the living as an actor, you know, and you know, by that time I had done Murder 1 and NYPD Blue, so there were like really healthy residuals floating around. I got a residual from Murder 1 year, not a year, it was like one day I just went, there was a residual, it was like $15,000 from Murder 1. I was like, oh, I bought a car, it was great. So that was where that was at that time. And I had a friend who was a comedian, and he had a buddy who was a manager, a literary manager. And I called my comedian friend up. His name's Ahmed. I met Ahmed. And he says, hey man, I got the script, man. I think it's really good. I want to sell it. He's like, you should call Brian, dude. Brian's a manager now. You should call him up, give him your script, see what he can do. I was like, okay. So I sent it to Brian, and Brian's like, so what do you want to do? I was like, dude, I don't care. Like, I don't care if they want to turn it into Pigs on the Moon, it'll be Pigs on the Moon. I don't care. I just want to sell the thing. I want to find out how it works, because nobody will tell me how it works. This whole thing is so I can find out how everything works. He's like, all right, cool. So he sat, he read it, gave me some notes, went back and forth through the notes. And so then once he was happy with it, he decided to do like a soft, what do they call it? Not pitch. When the agents and managers, they send it out. I don't know, soft send out. I don't know. They have a name for it, I can't remember. But he sent it out to a few people as opposed to like a blanket thing, you know. Because usually, you know, you go wide with it. You send it out to all the studios and all the production companies, and you see who bites. So he was like, I'm going to send it out to people I know first, see what they think, see how it plays, and then we'll go bigger. I was like, all right, cool. So at the time, there was a production company. I cannot remember the name of the production company. They had a deal at Warner Brothers, and the executive at the production company was Channing Dungey. And Channing is actually now, I believe she's the head of drama at ABC now. But she read it, and she was like, this is good. I like this. I want to go out with it. And she did the same thing Brian did. She was like, I'm not going to go wide. I'm just going to, I got a friend. I'm going to see how it plays. So she sent it to a woman named Carrie Richmond. And Carrie was an executive at Columbia, at Sony. So she took it to Carrie, and Carrie read it, and Carrie was like, I like it. It's good. Has anybody else seen it? She's like, no, nobody's seen it, not yet. Tell you what, we're gonna make a preemptive thing. We're gonna make an option, and let's do it. Wow. And we did it, and that's how the first one happened. See? I didn't want to be vague about it. That's how it actually happened.
Right, thank you for the detail.
That's how it actually happened. So it wasn't like, you know, there wasn't like a big sort of, what do they call it? Dos machina. It wasn't like a big thing that just sort of like landed. You know, CAA didn't just show up and go, ah. That didn't happen. It was a little manager, and he knew some folks, and those knew some folks, and then everybody loved the script. It all came back to, we like this script. And as I've continued, I've realized it all comes down to that. It all comes down to the words on these pieces of paper. We dig those, so let's see what we can do. That's what it's always come down to, in my experience.
I had just come off of my first television series. It was the very first television series ever on cable. It was called Brothers. It was on Showtime. It ran for 5 years. And I had come off of that show, and now I had 1 year, so this day that you're asking about occurred, I had gone through 1 calendar year of having deals made for 12 new shows. okay? So I went out on my auditions. It was me and a couple of other people. You know, so I signed my contracts, everything was ready, and I didn't get one of the shows, not one of them. So this isn't auditions that I didn't get. These are deals that were made for me that if I had walked out of the room with the job, I would have had another television series. And I went one calendar year, 12 of those events, and didn't get one. It was down to me and two other women, and most discouragingly, one of the pilots was down to me and nobody else. And I still didn't get it because the producer-writer decided that she wanted to play the role. Now, none of those shows ever went on to become series, but that didn't mitigate my feelings on this particular day. And I was crushed. I mean, it was the hardest. I couldn't believe that this is what had happened again in this year. And I literally went on my face on the rug and I just wept and wept and wept. And then I said, God, you know, I just want peace. I want to be happy. If you think that I'm supposed to move to Kansas, raise chickens and have babies, I'll do it. I just want a sign. I have to know something. I can't take this any longer, this amount of continual rejection after getting so close to so many things. And I stopped crying because I really liked the rug and I was getting schmutz on it, so I had to quit. But so right after I said the thing, I need a sign, I have to have something that is unequivocal, the phone rang. It was my agent. I had an audition for a movie with the then very old and ailing, I believe, Robert Mitchum, but it was still Robert Mitchum, and it was an old movie star, and I'd watched him when I was a little girl, and I was really excited about the audition. And then I had been something about, I had this feeling, I often will open a book, you know, with a metaphysical or spiritual or just and just see what I see.
Right.
And I opened up, I think it was the Bible, and it was something about returning home, a desert zephyr returning you home. And I got this, so I need a sign, the phone rings, I have this audition, then I do the thing, I get the reading about the zephyr, the feeling to go home. I got this overwhelming desire to return to Aspen, Colorado, which is where my parents owned their own legitimate theater when I was a child. So I said, I'm going to do it. And I made reservations, and the name of the plane, the train that went there was the Zephyr. And I went on the audition. I didn't get it, but I had my sign.
Interesting.
You know, it was, if this is all, I said, if this is just my vanity, let me know, because I don't want to do this any longer. And if it's not, I felt like this is what I was supposed to do. All the signs when I came here, I got work right away. I got my SAG card right away. I got an agent right away. And then I didn't work for a while, you know, and then I got jobs here and got jobs there, and you know, waited cocktails at the Improv and at the Comedy Store and all that in between gigs, and so I'd gotten all these signs, so I really believed that this, and I grew up on stage and this is what I love. And so I thought, well, you know, I've had all these other signs that things are right. That's what I thought I was supposed to be doing, but you let me know if I'm not. And so when that call came, I felt, well, that is definitely a sign, you know? So, and then I think, and then I went away on the trip, and I came back home, and on my deck, outside my door, was a script for Murder, She Wrote, and an offer to come and do it. No audition.
Wow.
Just on the basis of the work of mine that they'd seen before, they offered me the job. And I thought, well, that's my exclamation point on the sign that I asked for. But that day, Karen, that wrung me out.
I ran into a very inspiring man. His name was Norman Cousins, who was the editor of Saturday Review World in those days. And he came to speak in a class of mine at Occidental College, and it turned out we shared a motto that no one else in the world had ever heard of. And the motto was a was a single sentence by the Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset that said, "I think the only immoral thing is for a being not to use every instant of its existence with the utmost intensity." And I had never heard anyone else quote that, but after his talk in my class, I asked him to come to my office and showed him that it was framed above my desk. And so, needless to say, we bonded, and long story short, I asked him, what I should do when I grow up, which I asked male authority figures all my life, basically. And he told me, after we got to know each other, that I should consider the entertainment business because it was much broader than the academic world, and people could basically do whatever, anything creative you're encouraged to do, basically. And you could find your own way. There are no rules and schedules and all of those kinds of things that we find in academia. And I love academic, the world and the ideas that are exchanged and all of that. But it was restricting, and it was, for me, suffocating, which is a word that means a lot to me personally. It's my most ancient nightmare, is being suffocated. And I've never been suffocated in the entertainment world. I've been terrified a lot, but not suffocated. And so he encouraged me, and I thought, well, I don't know anything about the entertainment world other than movies that I've seen. That's it. And he showed me a passage from a book by William Goldman that I hope everyone knows, called Adventures in the Screen Trade. And the passage was that the only important rule in Hollywood is that nobody knows anything. And I thought, wow, that's good. It means it's a level playing field. So I set out to learn as much as I could, and I realized that I wasn't 18 years old in the mailroom at William Morris, and I wasn't, infinitely wealthy, and I didn't have relatives in the film business. Those are like the three main ways to get into the business normally. So I thought I just have to be smarter, so I started reading contracts. I remember a producer, I'll never forget, I asked him if I could read a distribution contract, and he said, "Yeah, I can let you read it, but I can't let you take it out of my office. You can go out in the other room and have a cappuccino, but do that." So I read it, and I came back an hour later, and I said, "I'm confused about some things I read here. Can I ask you a couple of questions?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "This paragraph number 48 in the fine print section at the end says that accounting terms used in this agreement shall be redefined by the 20th Century Fox accounting department at such time, if any, that litigation is entered into among the parties." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "That is not in there." I go, "Yes, it is. Let me show you." I showed it to him. And he said, "I can't believe that that's still in there. My attorney should have crossed that out. He had just signed the agreement." And I said, "Well, they didn't." So I started learning. That's how I started learning, by reading contracts, because I think whatever kind of thing you're trying to do, if it's successful, ends up with being a bunch of contracts. So you might as well start backwards with the contracts. And long story short, while I was preparing myself that way over a 6-month period, I came up with an idea that I sold basically on a wing and a prayer, not knowing how to do it. But it ended up being, within the next 12 months, 16 movies that I was completely in charge of, and raised half the money from Warner Brothers and half the money from a company in Canada. Went up to Montreal and shot them all back to back, meaning one movie ended on Friday and the next one began on Monday. And it was a series of romantic comedies. And it came out of my teaching romantic literature and also teaching publishing, because a publisher was talking in my publishing class. A visiting publisher was talking to my class, and he was telling us what goes on the cover of a romance novel. And I realized, as he listed the things that were on the cover, that he was basically reciting the rules of courtly love that I was teaching in another class, that were written in the 12th century by Andreas Capellanus, the the chaplain of Marie de France. And I thought, so maybe romance novels that everyone makes fun of are just an extension of these ancient courtly stories, these love stories. And I came up with the idea of doing a series of movies that imitated these love stories and were marketing friendly because they all had colors, so you could put all the DVDs on the shelf, and they would form a rainbow. So they were all called things like The Rose Cafe, Sunset Court, Indigo Autumn, etc. And we did 16 of them. And by that time, I was fully in the business because I was in charge of production as a creative production. And within 3 movies, my assistant and I were, we knew what we were doing, whereas we did not have any idea what we were doing before the first movie started shooting. And then I came back to Los Angeles and became a literary manager because I didn't have resources to option properties. But as a literary manager, you can produce properties by managing the property. And that's what got me going, and ever since then. So that was how the transition occurred, and it was just because I thought of an idea and I didn't know better. If I'd known now if I'd known then what I know now, I would never have sold it the way I sold it. I simply went out with the concept and convinced several studios to look at it seriously, and none of them had looked at a script or anything like that. And one of them, Warner Brothers, wanted to see a script, and I wouldn't show it to them until they'd signed an agreement. And they ended up signing an agreement in 3 days, and then I showed them, I manufactured the scripts over the weekend by putting out a call to the romance novel community and getting back, ideas for the script and so on. So it was a fluke, and one of the hardest things about being in the business when you've been in it for a while is there grows up this huge accumulation of experience that you have that makes you know that you shouldn't just pick up the phone and call the head of a studio. And I have to overcome that. I just reached out to the head of a studio this morning, but every time I do it, it's like having a 500-pound weight in your hand to pick up the phone, because that's wrong. But somebody like me back then, I didn't know it was wrong, so it was a light motion to pick up the phone and call somebody. And so whenever I get a new partner who's not involved, I always say, don't be afraid to tell me your craziest ideas, because this is a world in which crazy ideas work. And it's the traditional ideas that have a harder time working. So it is a completely wild and entrepreneurial frontier. It's probably the last frontier of American culture, the movie business, and it's been changing ever since I've been in it. It constantly changes from a world in which video cassettes dominated and you could find them everywhere, and to a world in which we're downstreaming from Netflix and Hulu and so on. And the delivery methods have always changed. And what doesn't change, and this is the encouraging thing for writers, is that the need for stories has only gotten greater and greater. With the proliferation of hundreds of channels, they all have one thing in common: they need programming, they need content. And writers are the ones who create the content, the intellectual property. So they should be hugely encouraged. You don't have to understand all the distribution methods, you just need to know how to tell a story, and you're in good shape. Just keep telling stories.
I pursued being a film major in my undergraduate in Ohio, which is my home state, and got a 4-year degree, BFA in motion picture production, which of course guarantees you a job in the industry immediately when you show up with that. And then I decided I was going to move to Los Angeles and become an assistant, because I kind of knew, that whole start in the William Morris mailroom kind of thing, that I knew that was a thing you could do. There were people that had moved out to LA from Dayton, Ohio, where I was from, before me, who'd gone to my film school before me, who had these kind of jobs working as assistants at the studios and stuff. So I decided that's going to be my path. I'm going to get it. My day job will be one of those kind of jobs where I'll be like a secretary, and I'll just be writing on the side. And so that's what I pursued, and was lucky enough to get into the Fox Studios kind of in-house temp pool, where somebody in the human resources department had all these temps that every day they would assign to these different jobs throughout the studio, where they needed somebody to fill in for a day or a week or a month or whatever, because some assistant was on maternity leave or out sick or had just left and they hadn't replaced them yet. So I got my taste of all these different kinds of jobs throughout 20th Century Fox and the Fox network, you know, everything from like legal department to accounting and finance, like very corporate departments, but also some of the, eventually the more creative side, where you're working on a TV show or working for a production company, which is of course what you really want if you're an aspiring writer. And so I did that for a number of years, and eventually got assigned to Tom Hanks's production company just as a temp, which turned into a full-time assistant job working there, where it was basically him and his main assistant, who went with him on location and had been with him for years, and me. I was like the guy in the office, like answering the phone and opening the mail. He was off shooting Forrest Gump for like 5 months at one point, you know, on the East Coast, and I was the only one there in the office kind of holding down the fort, so to speak, at his little production company that was based at Fox at that time. So while I was doing that, I was writing scripts on the side. And I had worked as a writer's assistant on the show Picket Fences right before I worked for Tom Hanks, and got to know other people at my level, other assistants, which is a really helpful thing to do. You know, they say, do you have to move to Los Angeles to be a screenwriter? You don't have to. It helps. But one of the main reasons it can help is if you're the kind of person that gets a job in the business like that, where you're around people doing what you want to be doing, and you meet people at your level who are also trying to do the kinds of things you want to do, and you can sort of help each other. And that certainly worked out for me, because I switched from writing features on spec to, I took a class at UCLA Extension's Writers Program, where I have taught now in recent years myself on sitcom writing. I started writing a spec script for the show Frasier in that class. And then when it was done, I showed it to this friend I'd worked with on Picket Fences, who was a fellow assistant, but also an aspiring writer who had just gotten an agent. And she liked the Frasier and was willing to show it to her agent. And the agent liked the Frasier enough to want to sign me. So I got this agent while I was still working as an assistant for Tom Hanks, and this agent functioned kind of like managers do now. Managers weren't such a thing back then, where she was giving me notes. You know, she signed me off it, but then she immediately wanted me to rewrite it with all these notes she gave me before she would send it to anyone. And so then she had me, after that was done, she had me start my next one, which was a Mad About You, and then after that a Friends. So I was like pumping out these sitcom spec scripts, because in those days when you wanted to work on staff on a show in the 90s, they more valued specs of existing shows, whereas nowadays it's original pilots that writers tend to use for writing samples to get into TV writing. You know, a staff job like that, which is normally how you get in, is, you know, you get hired as like a staff writer on a show if you're one of the lucky few, fortunate few. So that's the direction I was headed, but I still had the Tom Hanks really great sort of assistant day job. But I was really starting to think, eventually I'm going to be a professional writer now. I mean, I have an agent, she's sending my stuff out, I got some meetings here and there, but then things took a funny turn, an amazing turn, which is one day Tom Hanks read one or two of those scripts, because his assistant, who I worked kind of under, I think recommended, oh, you should have Tom read your, you know, it'd be fun, whatever. I don't know. I was never going to ask him to read my stuff or help me in any way, because I knew this is my job. He's not there to help me do that. And he apparently liked the one or two scripts he read and decided that I had talent, and he told me my talents were being wasted, and he offered me this like amazing, life-changing promotion the week of my 30th birthday. I had a wife and a kid, and she was a teacher, and I was making $700 a week, I think, or something like that. So it was a really good time to get a promotion where I was going to help him, basically help him develop this miniseries he had sold to HBO as an executive producer, which was From the Earth to the Moon, which was about the Apollo space program. He had done the movie Apollo 13 and was a lifelong space junkie, and at this point was the biggest star in Hollywood. He had gotten to that point by then. And so he was able to sell this idea for a miniseries, a very expensive 12-hour miniseries, where we would dramatize and recreate the entire Apollo program, right? All these other missions, you know. So I then helped him kind of figure out the sort of outline for that, and like find writers to write the episodes, you know, professional screenwriters that were already established, unlike me. But eventually I got to write one of the scripts. And then eventually that script became a decent script because it took a long time. And then I got asked to help rewrite some of the other scripts. So by the end of that production, From the Earth to the Moon, I had kind of been an apprentice producer on the whole thing. So I got a co-producer credit on the whole thing, and I had writing credit or pieces of writing credit on several episodes. And I just like learned all this stuff from just being on it from beginning to end and being able to be kind of in the middle of it because I worked for Tom and he was the executive producer. So I was on the set and in the editing room and did everything or watched everything. And so when it won the Emmy for Best Miniseries and all the other big awards, I got to share in those awards because I was one of the producers. So that was really how I got my start. I was very fortunate in that the first thing I wrote professionally not only got produced, which, you know, most things that writers get paid to write still don't get produced, right? You can make a whole career writing things that don't get produced. Not only did it get produced, but I was a producer on it and won these major awards for being that. So it was kind of a fairy tale beginning of a career that I owe to Tom Hanks and to, you know, the sitcom writing, which you wouldn't think translates into historical drama about the space program, but I somehow managed to figure out how to write for that series, even though it wasn't the kind of stuff I was doing on my own.
And then an interesting sort of audition story that I tell a lot. Again, this is something I learned when the Fast and the Furious audition came my way. Again, where I was at that time in my life, I didn't realize what I had. I was off in my own sort of thinking about what I thought about the business. I got the audition, and it was called Redline, actually, at the time. And I remember passing on the audition, and why? Because I just didn't want to. I had in my mind I wanted to do something completely different with my life at the time. Again, maybe 23 years old, you know. So I got the audition, I passed. Got the audition twice, I passed, right? My agent at the time calls me up and says, "What are you doing? Like, you really want to pass on this?" And I said, "Yeah. I mean, I was just being a little punk." She's like, "Fine." Hung up the phone on me. I'm like, "Yeah, right. I'm making these decisions." Another agent from the same agency called me up and he said, "Chad, you know, come on, go in, just go in." I'm like, "Okay, I'll go in." I was being a brat. A brat. And I went and I auditioned, and I met the director, Rob Cohen. He's very friendly and so nice, and the casting director, who I love, and so I auditioned, and they liked what I did, and then they called me back, or they want me to come back and read with a couple of the other actors, and so I'm like, all right. And then you start to like sort of play it in your mind. You're like, oh, you like me? Okay, you know. All right, yeah, I'll go back in. Yeah, sure. So I go in and I read with, I think it was Matt Schultz at the time, and Johnny Strong, I believe. And they were trying to fit the guys, you know, because they already had, you know, Paul and Vin and everybody. And I ended up booking this movie. I got the part, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And we're gonna do all these cars, and then we got on set, and it became, you know, this crazy thing, and everyone's gonna be like, oh, it's gonna be huge. It's gonna be this big movie. And I'm like, no, I don't think so, guys. I was just so locked into this brain of mine, and then lo and behold, it became like a huge phenomenon. It changed my life instantly, and it taught me again that you never know. Don't turn down an audition. Don't be silly, you know. And I was really silly, and I tell this story, and not that I am so appreciative that I went in and I was given that opportunity, and it changed my life forever. So I learned a valuable lesson then, you know, just, you know, keep your mind open, you know, appreciate what you have. If it comes when you're 19, if it comes when you're 40, just appreciate that moment. So.
How long before then you get your next job, which is The Wedding Singer?
So meanwhile, Adam was having his career was going in a really good way, and I was determined not to come to LA without a movie because I knew everybody was a director, and Adam had seen the movie and loved it, and I remember he had his agent see it, and they're like, "Oh, it's cool," you know. And the fact that I did a movie, Adam couldn't wait for me to direct his movies. He had done, I think, Billy Madison by then. He called me up and said, I'm working on a comedy album. You already made your movie. Come to LA, come for 2 weeks and help me with the comedy album. And it was an album called What the Hell Happened to Me. So I wrote on a bunch of skits. I acted on some of them. And then I did a music video for one of the songs. It was Steve Polychronopoulos. It was kind of a precursor to The Wedding Singer because it was an 80s bully, but it was all about 80s wardrobe, stonewashed pants and the bi-level haircut. And I shot this video and I didn't realize, like, all eyes, because Adam was just starting to really excel. Every bigwig in town came to see who's this Frank Karachi guy directing the video, and I'm just loving it because I'm getting like real equipment and and it had like all the comedians that were friends with David Spade, Rob Schneider, so many interesting cameos. It was like David Arquette, Gary Shandling was in it. So it's this really fun, crazy, silly video. And then on the album, we did a 23 city tour. The album went double platinum. It was like one of the biggest Sandler albums. So it was a good little run where I literally came for 2 weeks and I had a bag of clothes for 2 weeks and I didn't stop working. I got an editing system in our house. We had a house in Beverly Hills and I was like editing all the videos myself. I'm like, this is great. It's like film school again. I'm like, I'm 28, something like that. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm getting to like live with my friends, shoot stuff, people really seeing it, edit. I'm like, this is a dream come true. And then we did the 23 city tour. Like it was a rock and roll tour with a bunch of Adam's comedy songs. So like the Hanukkah song, he did a bunch of other songs like the Halloween song, Piece of Shit Car. A lot of the ones though, like the turkey song for Thanksgiving. And I did sort of very inexpensive, I came up with the stage design. It was an outdoor drive-in movie in the summer and it was like beach balls and all this stuff. And I had the set designer from his movies do the set and I had a screen, and on the screen I would do things like, there was a song about grandmothers. So I got a bunch of grandmothers, shot them on green screen, dancing with spatulas. And then I took like contact paper from like grandma contact paper that you'd put in the kitchen.
Oh, yes.
Like really corny patterns.
Right.
And I green screened them again. It was like this weird, it would be inspired by like a Pink Floyd drug video, but it was just silly comedy for stoners. And then the other thing is we had a skit that, like, it was a super stoner skit that everybody loved. There was a talking goat. And the talking goat, these 4 stoners come across this talking goat in Van Nuys tied to the back of the truck. And they're like, oh shit, a talking goat. And Adam did the voice of the goat, like, hey guys, why did you untie me? I'm kind of bored here. And I played the old man who used to beat the goat. And so that skit was the most popular one. And I was like, oh, I got to film a goat for the concert because the kids love it. When I say kids, they're like 20-something-year-olds and we're 30 at the time. And so the goat opens up this show and people go nuts. And then I bring him back a few times. And New Line had seen the show and they were like, we want to do a talking goat movie. And we're like, oh, that's cool. But like, we were thinking of doing another movie though. And then we pitched them. I wanted to do a movie that was an 80s movie. And Adam and Tim had come up with an idea for a wedding singer who gets jilted and has to perform weddings after he got his heart broken. And then I said, Adam, let's make that 80s because then you can sing songs and it won't look like you're trying to be cool. It'll be a little retro. It'll take the curse off. And he said, great. And then we pitched that. And it's funny because it was 1995, 96. We're pitching an 80s movie and people are like, 80s? That was 6 years ago. And I'm like, no, trust me, like we dress different. Like I had the same clothes from 6 years ago. I'm like, trust me, no. And then like, sure enough, I learned my first thing not to do in Hollywood. When I was pitching the producer, I go, think of how in Dazed and Confused, the 70s was a personality. And then the producer was like, Dazed and Confused made like $10 million. Why would you reference that movie? And I'm like, no, just how cool it was. And I'm like, Oh, I get it. You just got to reference movies. When you want to get money, you have to reference movies that make a lot of money.
Okay. All right, that's a good note.
It didn't translate. I was like, no, it's how cool. All right, I get it. It's like the Titanic. No, that wasn't out yet. So anyway, so we pitched that, and they loved the idea. And then we kind of worked on the script, and then Carrie Fisher, New Line, hired her to spend time on the script because she was such the script doctor for romantic movies. And I got to LA, with my gym bag. I'd only been there for a few months. And next thing I know, I'm at Carrie Fisher's house. I'd have to go to her house every day when she was writing. She would literally lay in bed and write. She would watch TV. She'd be like, let's watch old movies. And then I'd literally be laying in bed with Carrie Fisher going, I can't believe I'm in bed with Princess Leia. Not, just working, nothing. And yeah, we'd watch these old movies, and she showed me all these great old romantic comedies, Roman Holiday, like you name them, Breakfast at Tiffany's. And then we would write, and it was great, and we got to make this amazing story, and then Drew signed on, and before you know it, I'm like, all of a sudden, I'm like, wow, I still have not gone home. I still have this bag of clothes, and I'm directing The Wedding Singer, and I remember the first day pulling up on Sunset. The house we shot was the old lady with the meatballs, Rosie, and it's the first time I'm driving the set, right? I'm driving my little rental Honda Civic, and I'm like, why are these trucks here? I'm like, I'm used to making a student film. We had one truck. There was like truck after truck, and it's a low budget movie. It's like a $10 million movie. I was so intimidated by the time I walked to set that there was all this equipment. I'm like, I need some dolly track and a camera. I didn't know you need all this, and but I jumped right in, and I just did what I knew how to do, and I realized, oh, now I have a lot of crew. When you change things, it just happens fast. And when we made that movie, we had no idea it was gonna hit. Like, it was a little low budget movie, and it just blew up in a whole different way. And then I thought, now I'm fucked, because now I can't make all those little weird movies.
Why? Because you thought now you're going to be pigeonholed?
Yeah. And I was like, I kind of want to make that. And then the funny thing was, I was like, come on, we're on a roll. Let's do The Waterboy. So The Wedding Singer didn't even open. We made The Waterboy. So in the middle of doing The Waterboy, The Wedding Singer opened. We flew home for the premiere. And I was like, wow, this is great. Now there's no pressure on The Waterboy. Like, they gave us more money and time. We didn't feel like, when you're making a movie, you have a gun to your head with budget. But I did find it for a long time. I was pigeonholed. I had so many little movies I wanted to do, and I'd be willing to do them for no money. And it was, once they put you in that box in Hollywood, it's hard to, and I didn't know enough about how the business works to figure out how to make the little movie. It literally took me 10 movies till I got to make another little indie, and I all along I'd been wanting to, and the movie I just made, Now Hot Air, it took like 7 years to get that together. The little ones are really hard to get going just because, it's always talent driven, so you have to find a piece of talent that wants to do it.
I went to the University of Texas, and they used to do this thing called the Hollywood Showcase, where they would take an hour's worth of student films and they would show it out here in LA at the DGA Theater, and they would invite alumni of the university just to come and see the short film, just to see like what are the kids doing back at school. And so the year I graduated, I had written a short film that played, and I had written and directed another one. So I had two, including a puppet short that ended up becoming the inspiration for the Happy Time Runners. So I was, living in Austin. I was delivering pizza. I was going to move to Chicago and do Second City, and then go to New York because, I grew up thinking like LA, like Hollywood, like sell out. What am I going to sell out? And so they picked two of my short films to play at this thing, and I graduated like on Saturday, and a couple days later, like I came to LA just to go to the screening, just because I'd never been to LA before, and I just graduated. I was like, I'll go to the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I'll go to the beach. And so I go to the screening, and there was an agent at the screening who just happened to go to my college, and he was just there to see the shorts, and he liked my short films so much that he walked up to me at the reception afterwards and said, hey, I loved your short film. Have you written any features before? Because I'm a literary agent. I represent writers. And I said, well, I wrote one for class. Like, I took a screenwriting class. And he's like, oh, well, send it to me. I'd love to read it. And I was like, sure. So I got his card, and I went back to Austin, and I mailed it to him. This was back in the day where you mailed people things.
Wow.
And I just kept delivering pizza, saving up money to move to Chicago. And then a couple months later, he called me, and he just said, hey, we read your script, and we love it. We want to sign you and represent you as a writer. But you have to move to Los Angeles. You can't move to Chicago because we want to be able to send you to meetings. And I was like, okay. So I was like out delivering pizza, and I went back and I was like, I'm out. I'm moving to Hollywood. Wow. And just from these short films that I had done that got someone's attention, and and I know the story is ridiculous, and that I was 22 years old and I was plucked from obscurity, but also part of the story is, I had these short films that somebody saw, and when he came to me and said, what else do you have? I was able to say, well, I have this script that I wrote, and I gave it to him. And he read that and he liked it. And so, I have a lot of friends who make short films, or, who, as a calling card, which is an amazing calling card, is a short film to get people's attention. And I always tell them, like, you have to be prepared for if someone sees your short film and likes it, and then they say, what else do you have? Do you have any features? Like, do you have something? You have to be able to say, yes, like, here is the other thing. Because I have a lot of friends who have this short that they've worked really hard on, and they'll go play a festival or something, and then they'll meet an agent or a producer, and the agent will say, what else do you have? And they're like, well, no, I've got some ideas, like, of stuff I want to try to start working on, but nothing right now. Like, you can't do that. You have to have something ready to go. That's my piece of advice. So this is actually a really funny story. So I graduated, and I was living in Austin, and I was moving out of my apartment because I was going to spend 6 months living with a friend of mine in her spare bedroom, saving up money over the summer and into just, like, I graduated in May, when you graduate, and then I was going to move in January. So I had like 7 months where I was just going to deliver pizza and make money. And so I had to move out of my apartment. So I moved everything out of my apartment except my answering machine. The only thing that was still in my apartment, because this was before, I don't even think I had a cell phone yet. This was 2001. So I had an answering machine. And when I gave that agent a business card, by the way, still my agent to this day. Here we are, 16 years later. When I gave him my card in Los Angeles, the only number that was on it was my apartment in Austin, because I didn't have a cell phone. So the only way he had of contacting me was to call my apartment. So I hadn't heard from him for like 2 or 3 months or whatever. And I was like, oh, I guess he never got my script or didn't read my script. So the only thing left in my apartment was my answering machine. So I went and I moved everything over to the new place, and then I had to go back, clean, and then take the answering machine away. So I go back to clean, and there's a red light blinking on the answering machine. And I was like, oh, I have a message. And I'm beep. And it's like, hey, Todd, it's Stephen from the Counter Agency. We read your script. Give me a call. Had I gotten to my apartment like an hour earlier and unplugged the machine, I just never would have gotten a call from him. Who knows if he would have tried to track me down by some other means. Wow. But that message was waiting for me. And the only thing left in my apartment was that answering machine. So I'm knocking on wood because I was really lucky. But I then got a cell phone, and I stayed in Austin for like 3 months delivering pizza because I still needed to save up money to move to LA. Because just because then I had an agent didn't mean I was like rich or something. I still needed to afford to move to LA. So I was delivering pizza, saving up money. I bought a cell phone and I gave it to my agent my new cell phone number. And he took my script that I wrote for class, and he gave me some notes on it, and I did a new draft. And then he sent it around town as a spec script. And he showed it to a bunch of producers, and like I didn't know what that meant. And so I'm out on a delivery in Austin, and my phone rings, and it's my Hollywood agent. And he's like, Todd, hey, we went out with your script, and we just set it up at Paramount it was Kelsey Grammer's company at the time, Gramnet. And I was like, oh, oh, cool. Like, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? And he's like, well, it's $10,000 option, plus you're going to get Writers Guild minimum of $27,000 to do the guaranteed rewrite. And I was just like, I'm sorry, what? What? And he's like, yeah, so it's a guaranteed $37,000. And I was just like, I was like, that's more money than I've ever even heard of imagining. Because I'm making like $7 an hour at this pizza place. So it was like a dream. I was like, I couldn't believe it. And I went back to the Double Dave's Pizza where I worked, and I walked in and I was like, I'm out. I quit. I'm Hollywood now. But then I'm a nice guy, so I actually finished my shift.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's admirable.
I think I even worked one more shift, but then I quit, and then I moved to LA. But that being said, I did then learn the harsh realities of, like, it's not like everything I wrote got sold or I got jobs that easy. Like, I thought that's how it worked because my first script out the gate, like, I got optioned and got a rewrite. So I was just like, oh, every script I ever write now is gonna get optioned and set up. But no, it took a while for it to happen again the second time. I hit lightning in a bottle that first time. And I moved out to LA thinking, like, I'm a wonderkin. I'm an awesome, young, hotshot 22-year-old. And then the harsh realities of being a working writer actually set in. And it got hard.
How soon after that?
Oh, pretty soon.
Pretty soon, okay.
Pretty soon. Like, I wrote another script. You know, I moved out, I wrote another script, and I'm like, cool, let's show this one. I'm sure I'm going to set this one up. And no one cared. Oh. People were like, no, what else? And I was like, oh. And then years went by before I actually set up another one of my own scripts. Because, you know, I learned very quickly that when you want to be a working writer, it's not like you write scripts and then go sell them to people. Most jobs you're ever going to work are you writing scripts for other people based on their ideas or pre-existing material. So it's not like people are looking for original scripts as much as it is, hey, we need a writer to rewrite that draft of the Ninja Turtles movie, or, you know, we bought the IP for some 80s cartoon and we need a writer to write a script for it. And so I very quickly realized, like, oh, I actually have to work really hard now to go to meetings and meet producers and try to get an assignment, is what it's called, in order to get paid to, like, write stuff. And for years, that's all I did. I mean, to this day, that's my primary source of income, is I just do assignment work, which is a hard job. Like, you spend half your time trying to get the next assignment, and then the little free time you do have, you try to work on an original script that you hopefully can sell to someone someday.
Early success, it wasn't really success. I would say, I wouldn't really call it early success. I don't even view it that way. I view it as 6 years of no one wanting my stuff. And it was, you know, some random person who was very kind was interested in the script, but it wasn't as if it was all of a sudden, I made it and it's happening now. So it really was a 6-7 year journey to selling my first project, which was Recount. And why I didn't give up, I think, is because I had something to say. And I loved writing these scripts, and they were important to me, and I loved working on stories. And it just was artistically extremely fulfilling, where my acting career was very frustrating. And sometimes I worked on some terrific shows that I'm really proud of, but I wasn't actually getting to act very much. So even when you're working, you know, I would do episodes of Gilmore Girls, and I would do 4 episodes a season, and I would work on it a day or two, and that would be one of my only jobs for 6 months. So it's really about 7 days on set over a 6-month period. So what am I doing the rest of the time? I'm auditioning and trying to get new jobs, but that's an hour a day maybe. So really it was a creative outlet for me, of taking my creative energy and putting it into something where I could actually just go do it. Whereas an actor, you have to be picked to go do it, and then you rarely get picked. So I just found it fulfilling, but I also was getting rejected left and right, script after script, and agents, managers, production company, everyone didn't want my work for 6-7 years. And I think I got to a point where I asked myself, this is not going well. What are you what do you want from this? What are you doing? And I asked myself, would I, and it's one of the key questions in the movie, would I do this for the rest of my life if I got nothing in return? And I thought, yeah, I would. And then I just kept writing. And then eventually, it wasn't as if 6 months later, cracked the champagne. It was maybe 3 years later that I sold Recount as a pitch to HBO, and then it just kind of went on from there. But there was a certain peace in knowing that it wasn't about selling something or success, even though I really wanted it. It wasn't a kumbaya moment, but there was a peace in knowing that, whatever happens, you just keep writing. So just keep writing, and that's what I did.
Yeah, and I saw that you wove that, I think, in 2 parts of the movie, that premise,
yeah,
which I think is a big eye-opener to a lot of people. That's something that most people may not be ready for.
Yeah, and look at what J.D. Salinger did, right? He stopped publishing at the height of his fame and then continued writing for 45 years for nothing in return. And he wrote every day, and he just did it because he just wanted to write. And I think, to me, that's what makes this story a profound story, is the journey of the artist. And he goes from being a young man who all he wants is success to being an older writer, which all he wants is to just create his art and nothing else. And that's the journey. That's the Aesop fable of this movie.
Where I grew up was about as far from the film industry as could be. Well, not as could be. I'm sure I could have grown up in Siberia too, but I grew up in a small village in South Wales, and really had zero idea of how you might penetrate the film industry or television, and it was sort of just through lucky. I mean, again, I think me taking some risks and some gambles, and then some happy accidents, that I sort of found my way eventually to SNL. There's a sort of long story in between, obviously, but essentially I went to New York, knowing again that I wanted to work in film and television, no idea what to do. New York seemed like the direction to head. LA felt like too much of a cultural leap at the time, I had about 5 jobs at sort of my first 6 months there. I was sort of catering and working in stores and all that stuff. And then luckily I got a job in a post-production facility that edited commercials, and I was working as a receptionist. And I was there for about sort of 2 weeks, I think, when Jim Signorelli, who was the longtime film director at SNL, sort of came in to work on something. And I just sort of, and we ended up chatting and at lunchtime, and randomly about 2 weeks after that, he called up and just said that his assistant was leaving, and did I want to come and work for him? So that was kind of my beginning, because I didn't go to film school. I studied theater, so it was a real weirdly fortuitous place to land, because the film unit at SNL is this sort of machine of film production where they're producing films, from start to finish in 3 days every week. And when I started, they were still shooting on film as well. So it was a really amazing, place to land and suddenly be on set. And that's where I kind of went there and then worked my way up very slowly. And here I am.
Well, that's fascinating. So I guess the lesson too from that is you never know who you'll run into.
You don't exactly. Be polite to strangers.
Right.
And again, it's there's definitely moments when I've sort of made a choice to maybe be more aggressive or to sort of you do have to assert yourself and take chances, because I don't think you'll ever have the right amount of experience that someone's looking for. At SNL, for example, my trajectory sort of followed a pattern the first few years of me. Like the SNL season is like a school year, so it goes September to May, and then you have the summer off, and you can obviously go do other things or not work. But I usually would go and work on something else, and then each September would roll around, and my first few years I never knew if I was going to get hired again the next season. But inevitably a phone call would come with Jim, and I'd usually sort of just maybe embellish a little bit about what I'd done that summer to sort of elevate my experience. So I quickly sort of went from being a PA to a production coordinator the following season, and then I was his line producer. Sort of my third year at SNL, I was line producing the film unit, and completely flying by the seat of my pants. I had no idea what I was doing, and was way in over my head. But week by week, got through it, and then I did that for about. I was the line producer there for about 5 or 6 years before I made the move to directing. And that's a whole other thing too. I don't think it's something you can Google. You can only, again, I think some people's personalities are made for it. I don't think I was. I sort of managed to do it for all those years. And again, for me, it was an amazing learning experience because you by becoming responsible for everybody, you inevitably had to learn about every, position on set, because you obviously had to troubleshoot anytime anyone had an issue. So you get to know the grip department and their equipment needs and what they do, and the electricians and the art department. So it was a really good way just for me to really learn my way all the way around, and then the same through post-production. Again, I just got really lucky. I sort of landed in this weird film school at SNL, and was on the job training. So, yeah.
Plus, with the stress of knowing that you may not come back.
Exactly.
No,
exactly. So you always kind of, again, you never rest on your laurels. You sort of take everything as like, well, I'm going to keep going as far as I can, and because who knows, like I might be looking for another job soon. like not that they encourage an environment of insecurity, but I think it helps keep moving you forward. Not to get complacent.
Every film I've been associated with has taught me a lot. And by the way, and truth be told, probably learned more from the films that didn't get made. Thinking back on why they didn't get made, what could I have done different? But of the films that got made, which are the ones people know a bit more, hopefully, I would say the Mothman Prophecies, which was another Richard Gere film, was. And there was one seminal moment, and again, that was a film that had been shopped all over town. Every company, independent, medium, big studio, all passed on it. I wasn't involved at the time. The agent shopped it. The writer I had produced before, I actually got to produce his first film, and he came to me and said, "Would you read this?" And I fell in love with it. And then I learned it had been passed on. And I found there was one company, and only one company, that hadn't seen it. And that was Lakeshore, a wonderful company. So I said, you know what, I will invest time in this, and I will take it to Lakeshore. And I knew that was it. There was literally one buyer in the whole world I could sell this to. So I went to them, and they read it, 3 executives, and they called me the following Monday morning, typical Monday morning call, right? Brilliant story. We loved the craft. It was intriguing, based on a true story. Oh my God, fascinating. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful responses from all of them. At which point one of them said, "So thanks so much for sending it over. It's going to be a pass. Only in Hollywood." And I thought, wait a minute, I'm sorry, did you just say it's going to be a pass? All this laudatory language, and then you're dead. And there was a long pause, because I knew this was it. This was the last man standing. There was no other option. And that was the company, I mentioned this earlier, that was the company, the moment when I said, "I respectfully pass on your pass." And there was some nervous laughter. I said, "Look, of course you can pass, but based on our relationship and our respect for one another, I would ask that before you make a final decision, let me just come in and talk to you." So I went to this meeting. I told these 3 executives the story of my relationship with my dad. Why? Because the script, when I read it initially, was so moving to me, because the character played by Richard Gere is so lost in grief after his beloved young wife dies. And a lot of the texture of it was reminiscent to me of what I felt after my dad's death. He was my best friend, and to me this film was a great film in its own right. It deserved to get made, and more importantly, it would be a private homage to my dad, and so I cared deeply about it. So I went into this meeting with 3 people who'd read it and said nice things about it, but passed on it. And so I felt the door was open just a little bit. And I never referenced the script. I never talked about the title. I just simply told him the story of my dad. I told him who my dad was. I told him about our friendship and our relationship and the love that we had, and what it was like when unexpectedly, never having been sick, he just passed away, and what that was to my family and to me. And I just spent not long, 12 minutes, 10 minutes telling him this story, at the end of which I simply said, I cannot imagine anyone, filmmaker, actor, audience, doesn't matter, who will not be moved. We're wired, whether we lost someone or not, we're wired to understand the tragedy and despair of losing someone so close to you. And they huddled and they changed their mind. Bottom line, they changed their mind. And we got to make this film. And it's a great film. It wasn't as big as Pretty Woman, but it was well received and actually become more popular over the years. And I'm very proud of the film, but in a way, as a learning lesson, it's like, you know, we talked earlier about never take no for an answer. And I think what I came away from that was, if you are, you know, if you're ballsy enough, if you're bold and courageous enough, just to, it's like, get naked in public. If you're willing to get naked in public, people are impressed, right? Because we all know about vibration and frequency, and if you're like, you know, when you're deeply moved and you're in that very deeply authentic place, and there's no BS, we know it, it's real. That's very attractive to us, and that's what we want to put on a big screen, and that's what they got. They got why this is going to move the audience and therefore potentially be a success. And the film was successful as a business matter, but that's not, you know, I don't measure it in those terms. I just think, how do I get a yes from these people so I can do what I so desperately want to do as a creative person? And the only thing I could do is tell the truth. And it worked.
I was broke. I had no money, no driver's license. I was living in mid-Wilshire. I was in a very bad spot. I had been acting now about 5 years at this point, 5 or 6 years. I had not had any auditions for film yet. I had only gone to do things in like the theater, things through the Drama Log, Backstage West and whatnot. Subsequently, my friend, my very best friend in the world at that time, was an actor who's become rather, you know, prominently known. His name is Thomas Jane. We were very, very close. He auditioned. Wait, I got into the audition now. Is okay now? Okay, all right. Again, this is a little bit new for me. So, yeah, no. So he told me, you know, I met this. I auditioned for this movie about an angry skinhead or whatever, and there was this British director, and he was very eccentric, and he was in the room, and he didn't seem to respond to my audition. He was referring to the director Tony Kaye, who directed American History X. He said, I think this director would like you. I don't know why. He got that sense that somehow Tony Kaye was going to connect with me somehow, or respond to me, I guess, or my acting or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what life was like then. It was okay. To answer your question in short, life was very difficult. Broke, no car, no driver's license, no job, and trying to get auditions. It was pretty tough. Yeah.
So you take Tom's advice, you walk in that door for the audition?
No, what happened is Tom said he's in trying to figure out, at that time they had not confirmed that Edward Norton was, you know, playing the lead part in the movie. And he was doing these cattle calls I guess apparently if that did not happen, or what direction they were going with the lead role. I don't know what, they had not figured that out yet apparently. So he said they're going to do a cattle call. They're going to be doing these cattle calls between New York and Los Angeles, and he was doing one there and then doing one here, and it was on this day, and I got the information. And he told me where it was going to be, and he said, you know, I happen to have the script because, you know, I auditioned. And I said, well, and he said, I'll drop it off at your house. So the following morning, he came in the middle of the night. I was sleeping. I lived on the first floor. he put it in between my window and left it on my TV, the top of my TV set. And I woke up in the morning, and I went and I started making my coffee or whatever, and I look, and there is a script on the top of my television set. And it was just a weird moment where I didn't know what that was and why it was there. It was some kind of like Lord of the Rings moment or something, really weird. Like it was surreal, because where I was in my life at that time and what that script wound up meaning for the totality of my life was insurmountable. I mean, because essentially what ended up transpiring from reading that story to the audition to then the relationship that I had with Tony Kaye for many years, for multiple years working, and since then just keeping in touch here and there. But we have had a relationship that has gone for years as a result of that. I just covered a lot of ground there really fast.
No, I'm loving it. I'm
Okay.
picturing this
Yes.
scene in this apartment.
Do you want me to keep going with that?
Please,
Yeah.
I want to know, how it all went down.
I actually, I had said earlier I did not have a job time. I actually had a job answering phones. That was like, I got a job way out in like Santa Monica somewhere, where I had to get up and take the bus at 5 o'clock in the morning for minimum wage to answer the phone for this Farsi speaking computer company. And I was the only American speaker, but they were wonderful people, and they were very religious, and they were amazing people. And this was you have to understand, being 24 at the time with no money, absolutely broke. Every dollar I made at this silly little job was going to every amount of living expense I had, so there was no spare. It was just a difficult time, needing friends to help me out and whatnot. So when this audition came up, I thought, this is unbelievable, because first of all, let me get back to the story though for a second of reading that script. I had a very long, difficult, complicated, childhood in and out of the juvenile hall systems and all this kind of stuff. My brother's name is Danny. When I opened the script, and I had gone through a very similar cathartic, emotional experience in my life, dramatic in nature, very much similar to the dramatic nature of the spiritual shift in the character in the story. So when I read the script, it was overwhelming, the emotion that came over me, that was not only what was going on in my life personally at the time, but also the fact that my brother and I mended a lot of stuff after I moved here and found a new way to live, right? So it was a powerful experience. So I could not wait for the opportunity to express whatever, these feelings were at this audition. So I had no idea what the audition was going to be. So I asked the Iranian family that ran the company if they would allow me to leave work, because I explained to them, and I sat and I talked to the man. He's a very religious man, so you can imagine this was with a very long, with the beard and the whole thing. And I went into his office and said, "Sir, if I could go out, do this thing. I'm an actor. I've been trying to do this." He got the woman that worked there to give me a ride. He permitted me and drove me there. When I get there, there's a line going. It's a building on Wilshire Boulevard near San Vicente, in that area, over there where there's a pavilions right nearby. And it was I believe on the third floor. There's a line going out the door, and everyone is getting a number. And when you walk into the building, you're greeted by the casting director that says, "Okay, listen, this is director's." He's a little bit, does things a little differently. He's got a camera set up there. When your number's called, you're gonna walk in front of the camera, and you're going to do whatever you do, whatever you're, gonna show Tony or whatever. So now I knew this was going to be improvisational in nature, and I had already read the script, so I knew one key pivotal point in the story. That is that there was this scene that the lead character does to the news cameras when he discovers that his father's been killed. His father was a firefighter, and his father died, so the media is reporting him, and he has this huge emotional outburst. And he's right into the camera, and he's pointing into the camera, and I knew that was in the material. So what was happening inside of the audition room was Tony was calling people up and he would say, how do you feel about white power? Go. And the actor would start talking, you know, I this, that, the other, and cut. Next. And it was going literally like a firing squad, like that one. And of course you can imagine sitting there aware that you're about to go up there. The room is full. Everybody's watching everybody's audition. So you can understand there's 100 people in the room and everybody's watching you get just wiped out. And I said, you know, had everything, nothing to lose. I figured, you know, anyway, he called me up. I looked at him. I saw him when he walked in the room and I thought, that's about what I thought a director looked like. Real tall, scary, bald, and intimidating presence. Very interesting. This man walked into the room and I thought, that's a director. I go up and, you know, I came from a school and a man that taught acting that was very, very, very intense. And he pushed it to the limit, and it was about risk, and you put it all and sort of leave it all on the field, so to speak, right? And the idea was that you have to commit all the way. All the way. No hesitation. Make your choice and you go. Launch. No fear. You face whatever fear is there and you spring anyway and take it all the way as far as you can within your choices. So when it was my turn to be called up, I thought, I don't know what's about to happen here, but my heart was pounding very, very fast. And I don't know what question he was going to ask me. I had an experience the day prior where I was sitting on the bus and a mother and her son he was like 2.5, and she was, I would say, abusing him, hitting him, and I had witnessed the whole thing, and he fell and he was crying and he was in need and she wasn't really helping him, and then the bus came up and I was about to say something and I didn't, and I wanted to say, and I had all of these feelings about that, right? So I plugged into that feeling from that experience, and I said, I'm going to vent the anger, rage, whatever, if need be, I'll use that in this audition. So Tony walks up and he doesn't look at me. He gets behind the camera and he's looking at changing the film thing or something, and my heart was beating and I was so nervous and I couldn't, and I just looked at him and I said, how you doing, man? And he looks up and he goes, fine, or whatever, and he kind of looks down, and I go, because I was at this point kind of, my nerves were overwhelming me. So I just said, and I don't know what, this just kind of flew out of my mouth. I just, in a real intense sort of way, I said, do you have something that you need to ask me? And I knew that got his sort of attention there, because he looked up from the camera with a real intense look on his face, and he got real excited, and he goes, how do you feel about white power? And got all excited, and then I guess I used all that, and I just, I did the audition or whatever, and I just went for it, and just, I guess it went very well, because, subsequently everything that happened after that changed my life, because I went on to work with him from that point forward. I was cast in the movie. Well, I should tell you the whole story, right? The whole progression of it, right?
So I'm assuming you booked the role right there, Alex?
No,
Okay,
no. What happened was, he was very, I got very intense. The audition was going very well, in the sense that I connected that emotion to that anger I had to that mother, and the rage, having my own issues with some of that stuff as a child, and putting that all in that moment. I just used that to imagine that I was talking to the media reporter that was asking me about the dead father in the script. So I took the opportunity to make Tony talking to me being a news reporter, as if I'm doing now the audition here into the camera, because I was talking to the cameraman, that my father, and I was just using that sort of to express the rage that this movement of neo-Nazism or whatever is coming, and we're justified, and all this ignorance that I was, having to portray. And that's how I did that. And then when he just kept filming it and it didn't stop, I just had to keep going. I didn't even, at some point I was like, when is this going to stop? Is I have to keep, generating this improvisation. So it was just like, and I said, he stumbled because he was holding the tripod. And then they're getting, he said, no, keep going, get in the light. Because I stopped, I said, do you need me to say, no, get in the light. And I just kept going. And then he said, great, I got it. And I said, great. And I walked away, and he said, hey, he said, thank you. And that was, I looked at him and I said, you're welcome. And I floated out of there. And I did, at that point, I didn't care that I had gotten the part or not. I knew I did something. Do you understand what I'm saying?
You affected him?
Yeah, no, I knew I did something of which I could be proud. And that is vitally important, especially having ongoing understanding of how to be an actor in this business. You have to understand the difference between obtaining the success, whether you book the part, and what you actually can be proud of what you did in the room are actually two different things. The results will come for many circumstances that are way out of our hands, but that one thing that you can do, which is a performance to be proud of or an audition to be proud of, I felt that happened. And it was a pretty neat feeling.
Did you take the bus back to work, or did the people come?
No, I took the bus back home, just really floating. I didn't even get on the bus right away. I walked to the pavilions, and I just sat down, because you have to understand, at this point, life was beating me, right? I mean, I lived in this cubicle, tiny 300 square foot apartment. I was just got a hold of that little job. It was just, life was very, very challenging at this particular point. You have all of the insecurities. My friends had started to work, which I was very happy about, but you start feeling those feelings of insecurity, of what's going to happen here, where does this go? And yeah, so it was a very cathartic, it was an unbelievable moment. And then you had to fill out your name card in this whole thing, and I forgot to write my phone number. So I left the audition, and I thought, well, that's too bad. A week went by, and I didn't hear anything. And I knew something happened in there. And so anyway, I had left my information. 3 weeks has gone by now, and I've heard nothing. And now at this point, I let it go, but that sense that I did something well still remained with me. So I wasn't like disappointed or anything, because I had no real expectations. Then I get a phone call from Thomas Jane, and he wakes me up, and he says, "Hey man, what the hell are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "What do you mean, what am I talking about?" They're calling, they're trying to find you. You didn't put your phone number on the audition card, you idiot. He said, they've been trying to get a hold of you. The director really liked your audition, and he wants to bring you in to read for the role, the lead role. At that time, I guess they had not officially signed Edward Norton or a name actor. So I guess that was still in play for a moment there. So it was an unbelievable moment, that phone call. And then, you got to get a script. You're going in next week. You're going in. The director's in New York. He's going to come in. You're going in to read. And it was just crazy, because I had never really auditioned for anything. I mean, it had to do with the movie. I just, at that point, just done all plays. So I didn't know what that meant. So I got this, and I just worked on it day and night. And when I went in, it was that same scene with the firemen talking to the news reporters, and It was an extremely, I got there, and when I went in to read, I took a breath, and again, I was there. I was in the right place emotionally, and it was the audition was fantastic, went well. It was I was very emotional, and then the Edward Norton subsequently signs on to the movie, but they call now Tom's manager, who's not yet my manager, but who then became my manager after that audition, because success has more fathers and failure has none, right? So when you start succeeding, suddenly you start acquiring here. That's another thing you must prepare yourself for. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But keep yourself in line here, and keep yourself and your craft close to your heart, and don't weigh your value upon whether others approve of. You must be proud of who you are and your work to survive in this business, I believe, in the long term. Anyway, moving forward.
So you booked the role that second
No,
time?
so I did the audition. Then they said, "Hey, Edward signed on to the movie. Edward Norton signed on to this movie." I wasn't in SAG yet. I had done nothing, no credits, zero. So this was all for me like a dream or something. You understand? It was like even being in this process at this point for me was unbelievable. Like a dream was coming true, from nothing, literally nothing. Now I can't even get on a bus on time, to now I'm in a studio auditioning for a role. It was overwhelmingly amazing feeling. And yeah, so I did that, and then they said they really, really responded. She signed me as a client. So she orchestrated then the next callback, which they said they're bringing you back in. So actually now I had someone to talk to about acting. It was really bizarre. I went from nothing to now I have like a manager, and like, whoa, this is really weird, right? It was really weird. So then I went 2 weeks later. I went to Stacy Keach's part. I had to audition. They were auditioning me for that. I walk in the room, and this was definitively, for my whole entire career, will be the defining, most joyous moment that I have ever experienced in my whole artistic life. Was that moment when I went to the final callback to do the scene that Stacy Keach does with Edward Norton in the at his house there after Edward Norton's come out of prison or whatever in the movie. No, so I was being such a intense young actor that acting was everything. I was so prepared and so involved in that final callback because I knew that I was very, very close to having my first opportunity to be a professional actor, if you will. That this was an opportunity and it was close. And I had as an intense actor, and I was so nervous that when they called my name, I had on a trench coat. I was dressed like the character. I had my combat boots on, my green skinhead trench coat, my wife beater. I was working out every single day, and I couldn't handle the idea of walking in the room and talking because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that. I wasn't going to be able to walk in there and just start chit-chatting and then get into it. I was too there, if you will. So what ends up happening is I storm in the room. Now looking back in hindsight, it was a bit theatrical, and I don't even know how they processed it really, but I walk in the room and I declare, and I start taking off my trench coat, and I look to the casting director and I said, "Who am I reading with? Tell me who I'm reading with. Come on, I want you to tell me right now who am I reading with?" And my hand is shaking a little like that. And she immediately gets very serious and says, you're reading with him. He'll be taping your audition. I said, okay, are you ready? You ready? Okay, you guys ready? And I just took over this sort of, all being driven by my terror, obviously, my absolute fear. But no, it was amazing. And then they taped it. I put my feet up on the desk and began the scene, and then it went really well. And when it was over, I felt like I had done what I needed to do. Like whatever, it happened. I trusted, I breathed, and I allowed that audition to sort of flow. And I flip my paper like that, and I said, that's that. And they said, great job, Alex. All the people, 10 people, great job. I said, great, thank you. John Morrissey, or one of the two producers, I forgot the other one's name, how terrible of me. One of those two gentlemen that produced the movie, one of them looks to me and says, do you have a girlfriend? I said, no, I don't have a girlfriend. And I was still, you have to understand, with the character and just had done the audition. And he says, well, do you have any friends? And I said, yeah, I've got a lot of friends. And my friend had actually driven me to the audition so I could focus. And he said, why don't you go? Now you got to understand the backdrop to this. I had 5 years of, it had been very difficult. So he looks at me and he says, well, why don't you go call your friends tonight, because we're putting you in this movie. And if there is a moment in life where you feel some kind of unbelievable good fortune, or a dream come true, I guess would be the word, considering the amount of uphill fight it is to become an actor, right? To have that moment for anyone. And I don't think that ever changes for any actor as long as they go. I think every time you get that, you got that part. There is just nothing better and more gratifying than that moment. And yeah, it was pretty incredible.